Welcome to Health Talk, a podcast that deals with people's real lived experiences with medical conditions and challenges. We are challenging the stigma that is associated with illnesses and creating a safe space for all of us to learn together. Today, we're going to be talking about breastfeeding, and I have a very special guest, Dr. Alma Nalisha, Cele, who is a good friend of mine and is also a pharmaceutical physician. She's a pharmaceutical physician working in the industry. She holds a Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery from Wits University, and she graduated cum laude with a diploma in medical development from Stellenbosch University. Thank you for joining me, and I know this is like an intimate conversation to have, but you are a new mom. Yay!
Yay!
To the most beautiful little boy.
Oh, thank you.
How has it been? How has this motherhood journey been for you? Like, just take us through your journey.
Sure. I think that it's been an interesting journey. I think that, often you think about the moments when a child is born, but I'm really seeing that when a child is born is also when a mom and a dad is born as well. So I've had to come into the role of being a mother, and I'm learning so much about myself. I'm discovering new things about myself, which I find very interesting. I think you have a preconceived idea of what you think you'll be like as a parent, and then the child is born. And then you learn and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm this kind of parent.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And is it all as natural as people say it is? Or do you learn on the go? You learn as you're going?
I think there are things that come naturally to you. And I remember just after I had my baby, somebody said to me, you are the best parent for your child. Aww. And like at the time I thought, oh, this is so cute, right? But it's also such practical advice, right? It's like you are the best parent for your child. And I think some things come very naturally. So like nurturing my child, loving my child, caring about my child's well-being, those things have come naturally. Interestingly, the other things like breastfeeding, those things didn't actually come naturally. And, you get sold a particular view of motherhood, but when you have the child, you realize, honey.
And this is exactly why we're having this conversation today, just to get, around the ideas of what's the reality of feeding your child, whether you're deciding to breastfeed, whether you're deciding to formula feed, and your journey through that process.
Sure.
So let's start with did you have any plans or ideas of how you wanted to feed your baby?
Sure.
Did you do anything before delivery? Tell us how did you prep, if you did any prep for this?
There's that quote, man makes plans and God laughs.
Yeah.
So that's been my journey. It's like I made plans and God was like, haha, okay, let's be serious.
Funny story.
Two girls walking to a bar. Ha, ha, ha. So what happened was interestingly, and I was actually thinking about this when I was preparing for this, I had lots of thoughts around like planning the pregnancy, planning the delivery, and even attending antenatal classes. So I was like, we must go to these classes. No. But I feel like everything was covered, but breastfeeding was almost skipped over. So there was just like a feeling like this thing is just going to be natural. You're just going to put the baby on golden hour. They're going to suckle and the milk will flow.
And it's just going to be this beautiful experience.
Of course, And so then I started reading up before because for a few medical reasons, I then had to have a cesarean. So I started reading up before and, I read on this is what a good Caesar, breastfeeding friendly Caesar looks like. Tick, 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 all these boxes. And with breastfeeding, I feel like I skipped over it because everyone around me was like, don't worry, it's natural. This thing is easy. You put the baby on the breast and that's it.
The magic happens right there. The magic happens.
So I retrospectively didn't do as much research as I should have, So I don't think that I was as well informed, as empowered, as proactive as I could have been around breastfeeding. I guess that also just feeds into the narrative that's being created around breastfeeding is this thing, it's easy, you get to it, worry about everything else.
Exactly, yeah. So you're there, you've got this beautiful, healthy baby boy, it's time. The moment happens. And how does it happen?
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, right? So I have my baby. And it's funny because I remember it so clearly. I have my baby. He was just at term. He was a big baby, so I had him just at term. So then he's there. I read up about colostrum harvesting later, retrospectively, which wasn't great. So he's there. I'm like, hey, nothing's coming out. What's going on?
Yeah.
You know, so I'm holding him. And I remember not also suckling well, not latching well. So I remember asking the nurse, you know, how are we supposed to do this? Like, what's supposed to happen?
Like, walk me through this.
So he's here. She's like, no, just open his mouth, put the nipple in. I'm like, I'm opening, the nipple's not going in. My husband's also looking at me. We're both just now bewildered, right? Because, you know, everyone's making this thing just seem so easy. And I think that was the first point at which I realized this may not be as seamless and as easy as it has been sold to me.
Yeah.
So at that first point, you know, he's there's no milk. I'm concerned, but I'm like, okay, no, it's going to be okay. And I speak to the nurses. I'm like, what am I not doing right? And they're just giving me this like very vague advice, you know, just like you should know how to do this. It's going to come. Hold him there, put him, you know, put your nipple in his mouth. I'm like, nothing's happening, you know?
Did you feel like the pressure was a little bit more for you because you were like, okay, you're a health practitioner.
Yeah.
You should, in theory, know how to do
course.
this. And you know, the textbooks say, okay, you change position, you do this, you put the chin against the breast, you know, all these things that the textbook writes. And this is what it's supposed to work. And now you're sitting there and it's like, well, this is not working. And there's not necessarily a plan B that you might have thought of at the time. I'm sure that must have been a stressful,
of course,
bit of a situation for you.
Of course, I think that, you know, there's the pressure of being a mother already and feeling like you must have it together, because if you are a mom who doesn't have it together, your child is just going to be scarred for life, and you would have now just wrecked this child, you know. So there's that first layer of pressure which you feel because you are a mother. Then there's the second layer of being a doctor, right? And the expectation that people around you have that you know how the stuff works, so you know how to do this. Just get it together, you know, like, you know how to do this, it's fine. Like, what does the textbook say? Like you're saying, so what does the textbook say? So I remember even seeing this guide. I'm like, I'm holding the baby, I'm holding the chin, I'm like, 1 + 1 is not giving me 2.
1 + 1 is not adding up. What is happening?
It's not make sure, you know. So I'm like, what's going on here? And I remember that for me was actually such a pivotal moment, because what happened was I was at the hospital, the milk wasn't coming out. They sent somebody, but she wasn't actually a lactation specialist. She was giving advice, but it wasn't great. And I feel like the advice was just wait and see. What does your mom say? What is she saying you must do? You know, but it wasn't useful advice to me. And that was like such a pivotal moment for me, because I remember a week later, it wasn't happening. I was getting frustrated. But I also was feeling the weight of like society's judgments. Like, you're a mom, you should know how to do this. Millions of women have done this. Women before you have done this with less resources, less knowledge. And, you know, like, your granny was able to do this. Your mom was able to do this. What's going on?
Yeah.
And I remember at that moment, I stepped out and I was like, no, I actually need help. I can't do this. And drinking Stony and everything that everyone's telling me to do is just not working.
That concoction that your mother's telling you will make the milk come.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, people are like, no, just porridge, Stony. I'm like, guys, there's nothing I haven't done, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember my baby was so small. He was a neonate. And I went with my husband. We went to a lactation consultant. And I promise you, that saved my breastfeeding journey, but it also saved my sanity.
Yeah. And can you walk us through what you learned through that, or through the lactation specialist that really was pivotal in how you chose to feed from then on?
Sure, Cele. What did I not learn, my girl? What did I not learn? You know, lots of things. So I think that's the response initially is to feel like, what am I doing wrong? You know, what is wrong with me that I'm not producing enough milk? My poor baby now has to take formula. What's going on, right? And I think that she was so good. I remember stepping into that room, sitting with my husband and our baby, and she's very relaxed. She starts talking. I tell her what the problem is. And she's like, okay, so you did the best thing for your baby. You gave him formula. And I cried. Do you know that? Like, I cried in the room. And my husband was looking at me. He's like, how? Is like, you know, what's going on?
Why are you crying now?
You've
What's
looked
going on?
fine. You've looked fine. But I think I didn't realize the weight of the pressure that I felt until that moment. Until somebody said to me, you've done the best with what you had and with what you know. And so I remember sitting in that room and she was like, okay, let's figure out what's going on. You know, why are you not producing enough milk? What's going on? And like, you know, people say, oh, breastfeeding is supply and demand, but they don't make it practical. So, you know, you just hear breastfeeding is supply and demand. Yes, it is, but there's actually a lot that goes into it. So first things first was the positioning. You know, baby wasn't latching well. So that was the first thing. I wasn't latching him well. I was just doing this thing that everyone was saying, just put the nipple in the mouth. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
You know, there's like a way in which you position your baby in order for you to make sure that they're comfortable, you're comfortable, you're not in pain, they're not in pain. That's the first thing. So there were things around what I was doing as a mom, but also there were things about the baby. So he had a tongue tie. He had a tongue tie. And of course, if you have a tongue tie, that changes how you can latch. And if you don't latch well, you don't feed well. And if you don't feed well, the breast doesn't empty, you know, then you start experiencing problems. You don't produce enough milk.
And just for everybody who's non-medical listening, basically a tongue tie is that the frenulum, which is the root area of the tongue, is too short. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly.
So it's too short, but it was also about the attachment. So it's not necessarily just about length, but it's also attachment, right? So it's attached where it shouldn't, and so it needs a release. And once you release it, you then have mobility of the tongue. And then when you have mobility of the tongue, because if you think about it, if you can't move your tongue around, how are you going to drink? How do you breastfeed?
How are you going to actually suckle and create that suction that you need?
Exactly.
How was that whole process? Now you've got this newborn and now you have to undergo this procedure. Did you have it done in the rooms? Was it done by the pediatrician? How did you go about? So I'm guessing the lactation specialist diagnosed the tongue tie?
So it was an interesting journey. So what happened was, initially he wasn't latching properly. And so he was very small. So he was like a week old. His tongue tie was posterior. So it wasn't like an obvious tongue tie. So as your baby grows, the chin starts, it's initially receded, but it comes out.
Yeah.
So just to take you through the journey, initially, it was just about like how he was latching and the positioning. And once we fixed that, before we diagnosed the tongue tie, once we fixed that, it was fun. So then I was like cruising for months on end. I was like, oh, this is so easy.
You were making that gold liquid.
Girl, it was like chills, you know, he's gaining weight, he's looking good, you know. Then I started experiencing pain. And what she taught me is, contrary to what our moms and everyone around tells us, you know, or just like the women around us, maybe not even just our moms, but everyone around you will tell you breastfeeding is painful. You're meant to have pain. You're meant to have cracked nipples. You know, it's just like, it's a sign that things, no, that's terrible advice. That's not what's supposed to happen. You're not supposed to experience pain. Breastfeeding is not meant to be painful.
Wow, yeah.
You know, and that's the first thing is like breastfeeding is not meant to be painful.
Yes.
And so I'm cruising. I start feeling pain. And why it was important for me initially to seek help is that it empowered me to feel like I can trust my instincts. You know? So I start feeling pain. I'm like, no, man, we've been cruising for months on end. There's something not right here, you know? And because I've already now gone out of my comfort zone and I'd already sought help, I called the lactation specialist. I'm like, I just don't know what's going on. I don't know if he has thrush. I just don't know what's going on, you know? And she's like, no, bring him in. Let's see. So we bring him in. She examines him. She's like, oh, he actually has a posterior tongue tie. Wow. And when you're small, you can compensate. But as you get older, it becomes difficult for you to compensate. Yeah. And I remember at the time, I started having like blocked milk ducts. So I knew something just wasn't right because he also was struggling to sleep. He'd been like such a chilled baby before that. Now we can't put him down flat. Yeah. He's taking in a lot of air. He's breastfeeding multiple times. Yeah. Not getting full. I'm experiencing pain. I'm just like, no, there's something wrong.
Is wrong.
And I think that for me is the second important thing is like, as a mom, you need to not feel ashamed to ask for help. I think often there's like a shame that we feel about, I need help. I don't know what's going on. I'm not doing this right. It's a me thing. But seeking help sometimes just means you have skills until this point. You need somebody to take you or empower you to get to the next point. And how would you know that? You've never been a mother. You've never had a child. I've never breastfed. Also, children are dynamic, right? So we were fine. We're cruising for months and now we're not cruising anymore.
And I guess each child is different. So even if you've had children before, your experiences are going to be different with each child. Yeah.
So then I took him in and she was like, no, man, like this baby has a tongue tie. We need to just get the tongue tie released and we'll see an improvement. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, he's so small. He was like three or four. He was 4 months old.
And now he has to undergo this procedure.
I'm like,
did you cry?
I didn't. I thought I would. But we had an excellent ENT who runs a tongue-tie clinic.
Oh, amazing.
And it was done in the rooms, so it was great. Tongue-tie released, and that changed our lives. So there were two two things that changed and shaped the trajectory of our breastfeeding journey. And the first was seeking help as soon as we did, because it meant like we could salvage the journey. I mean, he was a week old. We could figure it out.
Yeah.
And then post that first point was then seeking help and him having the procedure done.
Yeah.
And then, now he's just like living his best life.
So did you notice a difference with feeding straight after the tongue tie was released? Was he able to eat straight after the procedure? Yeah.
So, I mean, he was quite small at the time. So it was done. They sprayed local anesthetic. It was done. It was over quickly. So I initially thought, I'm not going to watch this. But it was over so quickly. It was, and I promise you, because I'd had the blocked ducts before, when he started feeding, we just went back to how we were doing it before. We were chilled. Yeah. And it did take maybe like a few days for it to 100% just be like the way it should be. But I noticed it changed immediately. And I think the important thing also is that had we not done that, now we're seeing that, speech problems are also linked to having all of this happen in your oral cavity. So we're also seeing, like, for us, it was really important that he's able to move his tongue freely because, of course, we speak isiZulu and isiXhosa. So if he couldn't move his tongue around, he wouldn't be able to speak the language, right?
I mean, it would be very awkward for umfana wesiXhosa ngakwazi ukwenza ama-clicks.
Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? And like, shame. A lot of that stuff is also because I think attention isn't paid to a tongue tie. So people think, you're struggling to breastfeed. Okay, whatever, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's like, why? So what else is happening? How do we correct what we can? And I think that was, for me, that was the turning point to realize you can seek help early, but also don't be afraid to go back and revise. And I think that it was so freeing for me, for my breastfeeding journey, to just be like, woo, let's go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Now, I want to touch base on something that you said earlier, which is the colostrum harvesting. Colostrum is that first production of milk that you make that is designed for a newborn baby. That colostrum harvesting, does that happen before you give birth, or does it happen in the early stages after giving birth?
So you're supposed to, the guidelines or I guess the advice is that you start harvesting the colostrum before you have your baby. So in the third trimester, say like from week 36, 37, you should be able to harvest the colostrum. So the idea is that you squeeze it out, you put it in like a syringe, and you take it with you to the hospital. So if something happens and you can't breastfeed your baby, you've got this colostrum, which will actually cover them until your milk comes in. But of course, because breastfeeding is just so natural, I wasn't really aware of a colostrum harvesting until very, very late, maybe like 2 days before I went into labor. So it was just, it wasn't going to happen. Yeah. But also, I thought that, the milk is just like this magical process. You're sitting there, the baby comes. You have colostrum for a day or two, and then your milk just comes in.
Yes.
That's not always the case, and it can take a few days. But the anxiety that I felt as a new mom and just not being able to breastfeed was terrible. And so much of your ability to breastfeed was also linked to just how calm and how relaxed. Everyone kept telling me, just relax, the milk will come.
Yeah.
And it felt like such silly advice. But honestly, when I relaxed, it happened.
Yeah. I feel like there's such a stigma in society about women who choose to formula feed, and I think it's an important choice for women to have. Did you feel that pressure in those first weeks when you made the decision that, I'm going to formula feed my child while I try to figure out what's going on? Did you feel that you had that pressure or stigma to not use formula when you started using it?
Sure. I think that being a woman, particularly having a child, will just reinforce the ways in which societal expectations are very heavy on the shoulders of women. So, when you're pregnant, you already get asked, are you having a natural delivery or are you having a Caesar? And if you have a Caesar, there's already a, okay.
Okay.
Oh,
you don't want to do it the right way. Okay.
Yeah, so you're already not doing it the right way, then it's the breastfeeding, and you're struggling with breastfeeding. So you've already now failed like one of the tests of perfect motherhood. You know, you didn't have a natural delivery. Now you're struggling to breastfeed, so you're failing another test of like natural and perfect motherhood, right?
Yeah.
And I felt that there was a little bit of judgment initially from people around me, in the sense that they just didn't understand why I was struggling to do this thing, which is so natural. You know, millions of women have done it before me. And women do it all the time. So why are you struggling to do this thing? Like, really, it's natural. Your body does it, it produces it, and let's go. Like, what's the problem? So I did feel that there was a little bit of judgments, and I think also a little bit of personal judgments, right? So I think that I cried in that woman's rooms because she was showing me a grace that I had failed to show myself.
Yeah.
So
you are your hardest critic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I just had a child. I'd had this baby who was great and he was healthy. And I was being so incredibly hard on myself, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's true that in many ways we can be our own worst critics.
Yeah.
And there was a grace that I think that I'm learning to show myself in motherhood that I wish I'd given myself in those first few days. I was still healing from a Caesar. I'd had this baby. I was figuring it out, the sleep deprivation. And then there was this thing that I wasn't doing perfectly. And I think that I was so harsh. And I know that I was harsh because now that I look back, I'm like, what was the crisis? This boy was a week old, you know, but I felt like the world was coming to an end and I'm not depriving my child of breast milk. And what mom am I going to be if I can't just do this thing? And I think you're right. I think that there is a lot of judgment, and I think that there is a lack of support for women, right? So people won't assist you to get the help that you need to figure it out, but will also then judge you for not being able to do it.
I recently actually just interacted with a colleague whose child had a breast milk allergy. I didn't even know like that was possible, and she didn't have the choice. Unfortunately, she had to formula feed her child. But our society is built in a way that it's just like, this is what you should be doing. And even at school, I think that's what we were taught. We were taught breast is best, right? I remember that phrase. And I feel like in this society and age that we live in, I think is what works best for you and your lifestyle. Because I think a happy mother, you know, like you said, a relaxed, not anxious or constantly concerned is the best mother that you can be for your baby, whether you choose to formula feed or whether you choose to breastfeed, you know? Now looking forward, or maybe looking outward to other people, is there a piece of advice, if you had one piece of advice to mothers to people who are about to become mothers, or to mothers who are currently breastfeeding, based on your experience, what would be that one piece of advice that you would say is something that you will keep in mind for your future pregnancies, if you have ever had future pregnancies, or, you know, something that you think is the most important thing for people who are expecting or have babies to know?
I think for me, the one thing that stands out, and something that I've taken on my motherhood journey, is don't be afraid to seek help. And now I just say it like standard to everybody. I'm like, if you are having a baby and you want to breastfeed, the first thing is make sure you see a lactation consultant. Seek help. Seek help. Even if the journey is just blissful and perfect, it's always good to just have somebody who does this for their speciality, to be like, okay, this is how you position your baby, things about pumping, etc., right? Because I didn't even know that, like, the reason why pumping was painful to me is because the flange size was incorrect, right? So I just needed an insert, and now I pump, and it's easy, and it's like blissful. So seek help. And I think that's the kind of advice that you'll carry on in every aspect of the motherhood journey, is like, seek help. Even if you just need an hour away from your child and you feel like you can't cope and you need somebody else to take over, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to say, I am drowning. Don't be afraid to tell your partner, your friend, anybody, is the idea that you just ask for help. And so that's the one piece of advice I'd give everybody, is like, read up, do your own research, make sure that you're empowered and you're well informed, but don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to just be like, SOS, I don't know what I'm doing, my nipples hurt, they're cracked, they're bleeding, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, send help.
So maybe I'm going to break the rules a little bit, but that would be the second piece of advice, is to trust your body.
Yeah.
people around you are used to mothering in very particular ways that also speak to their own lived experiences, right? So 10, 15, 20 years ago, people weren't having the conversations that we're having now. They also didn't have the skills and the knowledge that we have now. So if something doesn't feel right to you, trust that little voice that says to you, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Trust that little voice and trust your instincts. You know your body best, right? So like when people are telling you to scrub your nipples with, I don't even know, scarring and this and that, if it doesn't feel right to you, say thank you. Thank you, I appreciate the advice, but I'm not going to take it on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alma, for sharing in your journey today. Honestly, I think we learn a lot from having these conversations. And thank you to the viewers and listeners today for joining us on this health talk on breastfeeding and feeding your baby in general. Catch us on the next health talk.